Well, welcome everyone to Virtual Service Delivery Best Practices panel and discussion. We'll have to come up with snappier names for our sessions in the future. I am Rodel and Berlina Ramos. I'm with Peel Newcomer Strategy Group. And as many of you know, PNSG is coordinating a series of capacity and awareness building and professional development workshops to support IRCC-funded settlement service providers, primarily in Peel and Halton regions, which for some of you who are new to this format is located just west of the city of Toronto in Ontario, Canada. I say that because I couldn't help but notice a contingent of folks from the Visiting Nurse Service of New York. We welcome these folks north of the virtual border. Just note that there will be references to Canadian places and governments and resources. But that said, all are welcome, and we're glad that you're here with us too. In a moment, I'm going to hand this event over to a colleague and friend, Marco Campana. He and I work together at Maytree, and I'm pleased that as our careers progress, we're still able to find opportunities to work together and support each other. Marco is chair of IRCC's Technology Task Force. For 27 years, he has worked in some form of sector communications and digital services, from frontline client service to the first settlement.org content coordinator. He created and managed the Settlement at Work site, launching OCASI's Learn at Work online site for sector workers, and has participated in several efforts to create a sector community of practice. He was a part of the digital and social media strategy team at Maytree, and most recently works as a freelance consultant helping agencies harness technology in client service delivery. His current focus is on digital transformation, demystifying technology in social services and social change, immigration, diversity, and inclusion in Toronto. We are grateful that Marco is bringing his network and passion for both settlement services and digital service delivery to help everyone here. The starting point, in fact, for this particular session comes from the question, what can we learn from non-settlement sectors about digital service delivery best practices? This session is in two parts. One, a panel discussion, and two, an open dialogue with all of you, which are part of current efforts to provide IRCC with qualitative data on how our funder can support settlement more effectively. So if you attended last week's IRCC Planning Day, where we spoke about where digital transformation fits in a wider scope of challenges facing the settlement sector, this is a natural extension and a greater focus on specifically your transition to virtual digital services. So Marco, take it away.
Thank you very much, Rodel. I'm really excited to bring this panel to you folks today. This is a topic I think that is a conversation that's really only just beginning in our sector in terms of measuring the experience of going digital over the last year, more or less, and what that looks like in the future. We have three folks on the panel. Jason and Manjeet, who I'll introduce in a moment, are going to be here for the entire hour, and then Lawrence Murphy will be joining us at about 1:30, and we'll bring him into the conversation. So I want to introduce our first two panelists. Jason Shim loves to consider the question, how can we harness technology to make a difference in the world? He's the Director of Digital Strategy and Transformation at Pathways to Education, where he leads their technology and innovation strategy. For those of you who don't know, Pathways is an organization dedicated to helping youth in low-income communities graduate from high school and reach their full potential. Jason is an innovator with an insatiable curiosity. I've followed his work and have appreciated his guidance for years, and he is known across North America as a nonprofit technology rock star. He's consistently helped organizations to stay ahead of the curve. And to just give you a sense of that curve, in 2013, he led Pathways to become one of the first charities to issue tax receipts for Bitcoin donations. And he just most recently co-authored the book, Bitcoin and the Future of Fundraising. So Jason is ahead of the curve in so many ways, and I look to him for so much information and guidance, and he is very sharing of his information and knowledge. So we're gonna get a lot of great input from him. Representing the sector is Manjeet Dhiman, who is the SVP of Services and Strategic Initiatives at ACCESS Employment. In her role at ACCESS, Manjeet provides leadership in areas of collaborative service delivery, community engagement, program development, digital services, as well as marketing and communications. For those of you who don't know, ACCESS is very much a leader in our sector when it comes to technology innovation, and most recently has launched Vera, the Virtual Employment and Resource Attendant, which is an AI-powered chatbot offering employment services online 24/7 and job search support to job seekers in the GTA and around the world. Manjeet is the past president of the board of directors for OCASI, the Ontario Council of Agencies Serving Immigrants. And we're very happy to have her as well on the settlement sector and technology task group, where she's providing advice and insight to our work there. So, and then Lawrence Murphy, who will join us at about 1:30, comes from outside the sector as Jason does. He's the founder of Worldwide Therapy Online. So if you think that this whole technology thing is new and online counseling and online service delivery, well, Lawrence has been doing it since 1994. He is a pioneer in cyber counseling in Canada and an authority in that space. He authored the first ethical code for online counseling for the National Board for Certified Counselors. He is very committed to sharing his knowledge and helping service professionals incorporate online counseling into their practice. So for example, early on in the pandemic, in March 2020, he started offering online training to mental health professionals who were suddenly, like the rest of us, pivoting online. And he delivered over 42 sessions on just over 2 months, training about 7,000 mental health professionals in the techniques and challenges and opportunities of online counseling. So we'll get to him when he arrives, but I wanted to start and let folks know that we're going to be talking with the panel for about an hour. We want to weave your questions in and out of our conversation, so please use the chat, and we'll be monitoring that. Post questions. If it's relevant to the moment we're speaking of, I'll bring it into the conversation, or we'll make sure we try to get to those questions as we're moving along. We have our own first set of questions that I've provided for Manjeet and Jason, and we'll kind of start with that, and then we'll go where the conversation takes us. So Manjeet, I want to start with you in terms of positioning us in the conversation. So your organization's experiences during the pandemic, but also pre-COVID as well, because as I mentioned, you're an innovator in this space. But how have you and your organization been pivoting, innovating, upskilling, supporting staff during the shift to remote and digital work, and how is it going?
Thank you so much, Marco. That's a great question, and I know that a lot of work is happening across the sector. As you mentioned, I think one of the things that where I'm very thankful of at ACCESS is that we did have, and I'm sure many others did, digital services was on the horizon before the pandemic. So I think one of the things that we were doing was we were kind of using a very phased approach. You really looking at change management, how we were going to introduce slowly the different elements of online services and so on into our services. And where we had started and is really important is, first of all, just with a database, where we're switching from having paper files and notes and things like that, and then transitioning to something that's digital. That's really important, and that was really important during this pandemic, because one of the first things that we needed was to make sure we had access to client files and that we're able to case manage and track the activities that we're doing, and to be able to do that online without the paper files, and to be doing it remotely as well. So I think that's something that, again, probably many organizations were already on that path, but it was a long process. And I think one where we were probably around, I'd say 70% there, but there were still, some staff that prefer taking their notes and typing them in later and so on. And I think, again, the pandemic really pushed us forward to say that's kind of like, there's none of that. You don't have your files, you got to do everything online. So even some of those things, like those were new for some of our staff because they weren't, fully transitioned to that. Other people were more comfortable doing that. But that's kind of a core of our services. Maybe we don't think of that as online services, but it's definitely a very, very important kind of foundational piece. And I think that we had some experience in delivering online services from about 2016, when we first started to develop and launch our pre-arrival services. And of course, it being pre-arrival and supporting immigrants before they arrive, naturally it's all online because the clients aren't here yet. But I think as an organization, we were really kind of struggling through the, how do you use technology, and do we use technology for the clients that we serve through our community in our sites. We have 7 sites in the GTA, and we're very community-based. And we draw people from the local neighborhoods and so on. So there was this kind of like a push and pull of do we start to move our online services to these other programs, and we had started to do that very slowly. There was different opinions about if you offer it online, they won't come in person. Does it replace your services? Does it enhance your services? All of these kinds of debates that we were having. But still, regardless of the debates, moving in that direction and slowly moving programs, not completely online, but giving them access to the different tools and systems that we have. The biggest, I guess, addition or online feature that we had created before the pandemic was having our e-learning sort of portal and library. And this is where clients would have access. They would go in and they could do self-directed learning through different modules and so on. So again, we had kind of slowly phased that into some projects. And then the pandemic really pushed us into using some other tools actually that we needed to implement more immediately. And those are things like our phone systems, being again the fact that we can remotely call clients and access our extensions and so on. That was a really important feature that for ACCES we had the capacity, but we hadn't sort of enabled those features. We still answered the desk at our answered the phone at our desk, but with the system that we have, the VoIP system, we can now answer our phones right on our computers and extensions and so on. So we have set up a call center so that clients are still calling the same numbers that we have, and then they can get transferred to staff and so on. Teleconferencing is, of course, a big addition. A lot of meetings and workshops and things that were happening in person now had to transition to online. So just some of our staff were very comfortable and already using those tools, and others it was very new. I think the main thing that we have learned is that online services is not just like a one channel. Although we talk about it as online, it's not just one channel. It's a multiple different channels that need to be available. And again, much like in-person services, it's not just a workshop or one-on-one. There's all these different channels of communication with our clients and amongst our teams. And we need to translate each one of those components into the digital realm. So really it's a combination again of our phone system, of course emails, but our database for case management, the teleconferencing for workshops and webinars and meetings, but then also our e-learning where people can sort of navigate through resources and tools on their own as well.
Great, thank
how's
you.
That for start?
That's awesome. Jason, I want to bring the same question to you, but with the perspective that I know, just like ACCES, you've been working on this for some time at Pathways. And you also had a very ambitious start to 2020 before the pandemic hit, but that you were able to maintain some of that momentum. And so I wonder if you can speak a little bit to the pre and during pandemic kind of work that you've been doing, not just around technology, but also around processes, because some of the things that you've been doing that I find really innovative and interesting include having a sounding board within your clients, for example, to make sure that the choices you're making are the right choices when it comes to technology and communication.
Yeah, for sure. So I can speak to some of the context in which I entered 2020. It was that part of the measurement for performance among staff, already pre-COVID was around innovation, and so there was a very specific mandate to come up with the ways that we can further our service delivery and impact through innovation. And so, we were really already looking at various initiatives around scaling and extending, the what we were providing, and also looking at digital services. So some of the things that we were already exploring in the background were some of the ideas around how do we create virtual spaces, because one of the things that we often heard in our research is that students would find it challenging to find like quiet places to study or focused kind of spaces. And this is often in reference to physical places pre-COVID, like, if they're not able to make it out to a library or find a quiet place in the school, what other spaces could we provide? So we'd already done some prototyping around some online kind of video spaces where we would spin up our some servers that students could use. And what we were doing as part of the testing was, what if we scheduled, specific times where folks could hang out and just designate, this is the dedicated focus time, you can study, whatever you like, but this is like a time that you can set aside each day or each week to do. So in the background, we had already, there were a few staff that were set up for remote work as well. So that just to give context around some of the infrastructure. And coincidentally, we were in the midst of transitioning video conferencing platforms to Zoom as well the week before we all went fully remote. So all these things converged in March in 2020. And one thing that has been very helpful is that over the years, we have had full-time technical positions within Pathways, recognizing that an integral part of service delivery as well is making sure that we can supply like the infrastructure that is really critical to all the work that we do. So with relatively quickly, we were able to get set up to continue connecting with our service providers, our partners across the country, as well as students. So one of the very immediate things that came up was, how do we ensure that that folks can stay connected? So what we did was we spun up a video server so that folks didn't necessarily have to use Zoom or anything else, that they had just you could just drop in a link and have like an immediate video server that was ready to go. And so we had that up within about a couple of days, and we sent that out to all of our program partners across the country to let them know it's okay, if you want something to use and you don't want to have to worry about licensing, like here's something that you can run with. And we quickly accelerated work on a couple other initiatives as well. And what this has kind of evolved into is kind of building a suite of services that one of the things we heard and that we have, that is really informed our approach, is meeting people where they are. So while we recognize that there was still availability to send out things via email and such, that one thing we were hearing was that a lot of students interact with our program via text messages. But one of the challenges that arose was the amount of time that it would take to send text messages. And we were hearing stories of individually messaging many students every week. And so one thing that we're able to do was that we were able to build a bulk text message sender. So we're able to do check-ins and nudges and reminders of events, and just have them scheduled and automated, and to send them all out. And part of the benefit is that by rolling it in-house as well, that we're able to save on the long-term costs that would otherwise be incurred there. And then the feedback loops that you mentioned earlier, those have been really critical for ensuring that we are being very aware of what it is that people need. So along with sending out bulk text messages, one thing that we were hearing from folks was sometimes not being sure if a number is a landline or a mobile number, and that's pretty important. There are some folks that are still using landline numbers as well, or to did a phone number potentially get disconnected. So we actually worked on a phone number verification system that will actually validate a phone number to verify whether or not it's working. So all these kinds of things, we were able to do these things because of very much a long-term view of like building the internal kind of digital team. And so this wasn't something that grew overnight, that it was very much a team that has grown steadily, I think over the last 10 years or so. But it has required a very intentional focus on recognizing that technology plays a very large role in what we do, and that is very much an impact multiplier in that regard. And I think while reflecting on the technology piece, I think that it's also had me consider over the past year that while technology does play a large role, it really is more of a tool, and that some of the things that we've been doing are really more process oriented, and how process can inform our interactions with technology. So, some of the, very kind of even non-technical things are things like, shifting from maybe a weekly team meeting to daily stand-ups. So I think that that's a convention that maybe is more frequently found in, or at least in my familiarity in working in in the tech sector and such. But it was something that, having daily check-ins for like 15 minutes with the team every morning, just to make sure that everything's on track, but also to make sure that everyone's doing okay, and hopping on a quick Zoom call to do that. And I think also just making sure those feedback loops are there. So again, going back to process, that if folks can identify ways to make ways of working better, that we can act very quickly upon them. So I think feedback around if people are indicating that they are experiencing Zoom fatigue, that is something definitely to listen to. And what that has translated into is experiments with internal policies around hard stops for meetings, and an emphasis on no meeting blocks, where there are certain days of the week for afternoons where it's understood there are to be no internal meetings, just to try and do something different, and continuing iterating on those feedback loops. So the one thing that's been super important around that is just around communication as well. So things around we had implemented Slack a number of years ago internally, and that has been really important for ensuring clear lines of communication and setting up notification systems and such. But I'll pause here for now. I could go on for just the list of the various technological kind of implementation pieces, but the ones I outlined earlier have been kind of the major focus areas, and making sure that people can continue to really connect with students and keep those important relationships going, because that really underlies the work that we do.
I want to stick with you for a minute on the next question, because I think when you're talking about the process orientation, the change management, and being intentional about the way you're using technology, for a lot of folks in the audience, they haven't had the luxury of being intentional. It just happened, and they've been making technology choices as they've been going along, but they want to be able to build in the ability to measure. And I think a lot of what you've said speaks to that. So communication loops, feedback loops with staff, making sure you're in constant communication with your clients as well, and using tools that work for the team. Have there been other processes or approaches that you've been able to create to help measure whether you're making the right choices, and when do you need to shift and move to, say, a new approach, a new technology, those kinds of things?
Absolutely. I think anytime there is a chance to get feedback, that is something that we are actively looking out for. And not to the point where it becomes onerous, where every time you send us an email, you're going to get a feedback from what did you think of that interaction? But part of it is trying to strike that balance between getting feedback, but not making it just either intrusive or too time consuming. So, even after we have like internal meetings, one thing that we started doing for some of our internal committees was after every meeting evaluating how effective was that meeting? Like, was that meeting worth having, or no, or what needs to be changed? And one of the internal kind of culture things that we've done is we're piloting kind of an internal program called Tiny Gains, and that's really operating off the principle of 1% gains. So that even if you take 1 to the power of 1 point, or 1 multiplied by 1.01, so 1% gain, accrued over the course of a year, I think the multiplier is something like, that's a 37x improvement. And really trying to communicate that to all staff, and indicating, like, no matter what it is that we're doing internally, whether it's technology or process or whichever, like, take a step back and think, could we even make this 1% better? And if so, there's a process for documenting that internally, and that enters into our Tiny Gains tracking. So over the course of a year, that it's also a source of pride for staff to be able to look at it and be like, yeah, look at all these like amazing tiny gains that we've made over the course of a year that have are taking us towards that 37x improvement, assuming one is made every day. The other, to get into more specificity, is having standing meetings for feedback sessions. So one thing that in our development of some of the tools that we're building is having a standing weekly meeting with staff members and as well as students across the country, to just get a sense of like, hey, what do you think of the latest feature that was just pushed out, or the latest thing that we did, and just really sitting back and listening, and trying to nudge things a little bit forward every week. So it's sometimes the feedback that comes back is very direct. Sometimes it's a little bit more ambiguous, but underlying it, there's always a little seed in there that has resulted in some really cool insights.
Is that the same group of students each week? Like, do you have kind of a sounding board, or do you kind of mix it up when you're getting that input?
For some of the groups, it is the same group, and for others, it does change up. So it depends on availability. But one of the groups I'm thinking of in particular that we work with in St. John has been the same students, and that has been helpful because as they've been building that comfort level and such, that they also feel more comfortable, sharing the more critical feedback that is ultimately more helpful.
So these are the outward kind of pieces, the tiny gains, having a data approach to do that for incremental change, having these standing meetings with clients and with students. Below the iceberg, there's making that actually impact the work that you're doing. And what does that take as an organization around internal processes and internal trust and relationships, and even power issues within an organization, to be able to say, okay, we're going to listen, but we're also going to use that in some meaningful way to make change within the organization. That's much more than just asking and doing. There's process and relationship and power issues within that framework that I imagine that you're dealing with as well.
Definitely, for sure, and I think one of the things that has been an evolution on my own team has been the implementation of things, a process. Blameless postmortems. So after something, a project goes on, or if there's a technical incident or something, that it's really just reminding everyone of the fundamental principles where when debriefing on it, that we need to be as critical as we can about it, but we also need to manage that emotional layer of like, there is no blame to be assigned here. We're all in it as a team, but we do need to make sure that we are constantly improving as well. So those are processes that we're actively kind of we're borrowing a lot from the tech side of things. In part, we have had some staff that have that draw on experiences from that, and so we're kind of cross-pollinating the worlds. Yeah.
Great, Lawrence, I see you there. We'll call upon you soon, but I want to direct the same question to Manjeet around how you're finding as you're making these pivots and these changes pre-COVID and during. How are you trying to measure You're a large organization like Jason's. You're in multiple locations. What kind of approaches have you been taking to try to measure the impact and the choices you're making?
Yeah, so I think one of the important things is, again, technology is a tool, and a lot of our core measures remain the same, right? So we're really looking at, our intake numbers, the number of participants. Are they logging on? What are our, like, how long do they stay? Do they complete the program? Those kinds of things we were looking at before, and we need to continue to look at that now. Is that changing because of the technology? And in some ways, we are noticing that with technology, that there, for some people, it's improved their access to our services. And so, we don't get the same once people, if they have the technology, and I'll speak to that, if they have the technology, they have the digital skills, then what we're actually seeing better attendance. We're seeing strong participation because the barrier of getting to our office and childcare and travel costs and all of those things are being eliminated. So we can measure those things as well, so we can see where there is advantage and participation. We also know where there has been drop-offs in the number of clients who can participate, and we're asking those questions very directly through the phone and through the intake process, and trying to get a sense of how many people can't participate because of some of the same reasons, because of childcare, that they have children at home, they're finding it difficult, or maybe they don't have the technology and so on. So we're really looking at ways of gathering both quantitative as well as qualitative data. So that's really an important piece. And I think, even to the earlier discussion about, key learnings, I think before there was a choice, not only for us as an organization about the extent to which we adopt the technology, but even for our clients, there was always the choice. So, if they weren't comfortable with the online, if they didn't even, sometimes they don't even want to work on by email or a phone, they want to come and talk to their counselor in person. So, and that's fine, we have those choices. Unfortunately, under these circumstances, that lack of choice means that there's many people who are not able to access our services. So that's a really important piece for us to look at, and I think it goes again, speaks again to that mix of services. What can they participate in? And Marco, we've talked about before about some of the things that we've done to offset those challenges with, like, loaning devices, helping people like advocate for resources around internet access and so on. So all those things are really important. But in terms of measuring, again, as I said, some of the core measures stay the same. It's participation numbers, completion numbers. But I also do find that, in some ways, using digital services makes metrics and feedback actually much easier. So it's not just, again, conversation, it's things are getting documented, they can be tracked, they can be, data can be compiled and looked at. And then decisions can be made about what's working and what's not working. And that is a really important piece. And for us, online services has not just been the direct services, but we have things like, for example, our ACCES, which is on our website, and it's different pieces of information, resources, videos, all of those things. And we have a lot of metrics behind that. We can see which of those resources are people looking at, how long are they looking at it, all of those things. And then that really gives us a sense of, okay, what more should we create? What should we eliminate? What are people liking and not? So it does, in that way, we're using a lot of the metrics from those. I have to say also, even around outreach is a really big piece. If we think about how we were engaging clients into our services, there was a lot of in-person promotion and collaboration. People were seeing flyers and brochures and going to libraries and things like that. And we've lost a lot of that, or almost all of that. So we're really relying on digital and online marketing, but also word of mouth again. So even just on the phone, talking to our clients, saying like, if you have anybody, if you know of anybody who's looking, so that kind of encouragement of getting the referrals and working in collaboration is really important. Yeah, we did notice in some of our programs, again, just looking at intake numbers where there is strength and we're still seeing strong intake in other programs where there's been declines, and then we have to look at ways of improving that.
I think that the key message is that the core measures remain the same is something that's really important. Your outcomes are, the choices you make are about client outcomes or client support. And I like in our preliminary report for the task group, we got a really interesting quote from an IT director about choosing technology solutions and evaluating them. And he was very frank. He said, the only wrong answer technologically is the one that doesn't work. So if what you're doing is working and you're finding out that it's working because you're getting that feedback from clients, you already have measures in place, or you should have, you're going to find out very quickly whether the specific intervention, whether it's technology or not, is actually working. And we've had this conversation on the task group as well. I think part of the challenge is we don't always have those core capacities in place in our organization. So we have a three-legged table that isn't totally built up yet. And we're layering digital on top of that. And then it just kind of collapses because we haven't built the structures and capacities in place in order to sort of do that. So I think that's a really important message about core service delivery. And Lawrence, welcomed. I'd already introduced you. I promise I said nice things. And I want to bring you in. I want to bring you into the conversation to further this conversation, this piece about measuring. One of the questions from folks pre-workshop was, what are some of the standards and guidelines that our sector can compare with other sectors? And I know because you've done a lot of work in assessing this and what's considered best or promising practices, what you might be able to share with those kinds of standards and accepted protocols and things like that around digital or online service delivery.
Right. So the first thing is that most people will have a professional association they belong to. It's definitely worth checking in with them. And if they don't have something, tell them they have to have something. It's not acceptable a year in for them not to. Anyway, so the CRPO has some pretty good materials. The CCPA has some pretty good materials. OASW has good materials. BCASW. I've been doing webinars, you probably told people, all across the country. And I did 97th today.
Oh, wow. I only told them you had done 42 in the first 2 months of 2020. So
I have
well
done
done.
97. I've trained 11,000 mental health professionals across the country in the last 11 months.
So what are the big themes you're hearing from those folks about what they don't know, what they're wondering about in terms of guidelines?
I mean, a lot of it is, what platform should I use and how do I know what the keys are for using a platform? Another thing is around clients getting to choose what they want to do. I think most people thought that this was what everybody was going to want. It turns out that a lot of young people have no interest in being on video. A lot of young people want to be on the phone. They would rather text, instant message. So that's one of the issues. And then the third, I'm dealing with all sorts of different kinds of agencies and populations and so on. So there are some, smaller minor themes, but the third one is around risk. People who are at risk, populations who are at more risk, how do we deal with that and what do we do? People, who are, maybe they're working with a population who, a year ago, sure, there would be some yelling in the family and there'd be storming out, and that's not good, but that would be the extent of it. And now it's physical violence. Now it's elder abuse, and which there was yelling and insults and things, and that's not good, but it wasn't physical, and now it is. So it's yeah. And then I guess the one other thing is compassion fatigue and burnout. So the initial training that I was doing was around how to use video to communicate with clients, and what are, how do you compensate for the absence of nonverbals on the phone and things. I did one last week for the Ontario Association of Social Workers on burnout and compassion fatigue. And there were 380 people on the call. So
it's an issue, obviously.
it's a huge issue, and it's across the board. And yeah.
So we're a sector that's full of acronym soup as well. And you went really quickly through some of those associations. I'm wondering, because those are sectors that we perhaps could look at for some of these standards and promising practices. Can you just expand out the names of those
Sure.
associations?
Yeah, so the CCPA is the Canadian Counseling and Psychotherapy Associations. That's mine. There's the Ontario Association of Social Workers. There's the British Columbia Association of Social Workers. The BCACC, which is the British Columbia Association of Clinical Counselors. They're also doing some great work. Social work associations across the country. Most of them, not all, but most of them have excellent materials. And then the CRPO is the College of Registered Psychotherapists in Ontario. So it's a legislated overarching body rather than, a sort of a volunteer group that came together. But they also have some good information. I sent you a checklist that it's just a nice little checklist, nice little tool to be able to run through.
Yeah, and we'll be sharing all of that. Plus, in previous conversations, you've provided me with those links to everything you just mentioned, and we'll make sure those go out.
Fabulous.
And what I think is useful to speak to a little bit is that those are professions, associations that do this work in a regulatory framework. And in the settlement sector, unless it's very specific, like someone who is a social worker doing social work, we don't exist in that same kind of regulatory framework. So I think it's useful to know about where there's interesting and replicable models that sort of already hit a high standard that we can then incorporate into our work, because then we know we're hitting that high standard. We don't have to wonder, is this an acceptable level of standard practice, because someone else who's going to get sued if they don't meet it has established those parameters.
That's always a good bar. If the person's going to get sued and they're doing this, do that.
Absolutely. And so you've mentioned there's some checklists. What are some of the elements for people's individual capacity to think through? I'm doing this work as a frontline worker. What's the mental checklist they need to be going through in order to ensure that their interventions are effective and safe, and that they're measuring the outcomes of those in this space? Again, when you're not having the body language, perhaps maybe you're not even on video with someone, how does that change the way that you actually figure out whether your interventions are effective?
Yes, that's a huge question. I mean, that's what I've been doing for the last 10 months at 3.5 hours a time. So
give us the 5-minute version.
Yeah, give us the 5-minute version. So to distill it, so the first thing is to be consciously aware and to reflect on and think about the absence of tone of voice and nonverbals. And so, thinking about on the phone when you're talking to somebody, what would you be aware of if they were with you? All sorts of stuff. So maybe check in with them, and see how they're doing. I might be crying. You don't know unless I tell you. And here's one of the funny things about these environments is people don't actually reflect on that. They don't think to themselves typically, oh, wait a minute, I'm on the phone. They can't see me. This is not a thing that happens in our brain. We just pick up the phone and go, yo, what's up? So being conscious of those things, the absence of tone of voice and nonverbals, and the degree to which they both give you information as the professional, and also allow you to communicate to your clients, to your customers. And then in terms of that, one of the things I'd say about video, I do this illustration when I do the training, is as soon as we get on video, we think, hey, I've got all of it. It's all available to me here, right? Because I can see the person. Our brain kind of tricks us. But, what am I doing with my hands? I'm wringing my hands. I'm actually quite uncomfortable with these questions you're asking me, Marco. What am I doing with my legs? I have my legs up off the ground. I'm rubbing my ankles together. I really wish you'd stop, actually. It's really freaking me out. But you don't know. If I can control my tone of voice, if I can control my facial expressions, you have no idea what's happening to me. So one of the big keys in online work is to slow down. Slow things down. And the second thing is check in more regularly. How's this going for you? I want to stop asking you questions for a moment just to see how it's working for you, how you're feeling here. Check in more regularly, because you can see me from here up. And, I do this too in the training. If I'm on the phone, I'm not going to do this. Hey, Marco, how's it going, man? I'm going to be like this. You see me from here up. Everything else is absent. There's a lot of information that comes out from the way I carry my body, the way I move my hands. It's all absent. So being conscious of that when you go into the environment, reflecting on the implications of that for the work that you're doing. And then you want to decide, how much of this do I need to question my client about? How much of what I'm going through do I want to share? But basically the two big things are, one, slow things down, and two, check in more often. What's up? How's it going?
Thank you, Lawrence. So I feel like our sector can learn a lot from other sectors around again, the standards, but also the practices and the conversations they're having. So I'm wondering, Manjeet and Jason as well, have you been looking outside of your own spaces, your own networks, to see how you can bring different practices in and test them and evaluate them in terms of how they might be able to impact the work that you're doing? Jason, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I think what I mentioned earlier was moving to things like a daily check-in, which more familiar like on a kind of Scrum team type approach. I would say that the what Lawrence just mentioned earlier really resonated, because that is one thing that we're seeing reflected in our data as well. That when students are hopping on calls, that video tends to be turned off, and what we're kind of borrowing from other, I guess, organizations, or more in the kind of marketing or tech side, is we have made increased use of video, but asynchronous video. So using tools like Vidyard to like pre-record messages to kind of convey like, those like, hey, we're this is a message we just want to send or get across that goes beyond that text message or a voice message, but just to try and build a little bit more of a connection there as well. Those are the immediate things that come to mind in terms of borrowing from others. And then like setting up ticketing systems, because I think that's one thing that in terms of the level of expectations that people are bringing for like service delivery, that we're actually competing more with like Uber and McDonald's, and that you literally can click something and something will show up at your door within 10-15 minutes. It's that even something as simple as building in a ticketing system so that people can get more rapid responses, so that it's not waiting for it to be triaged by like a single person, that you can have a higher visibility. So those are kind of practices that we're and tools that we've kind of brought in and emphasized more.
I think that's a really important point, to look at the experiences that people are having in other places like businesses, right? The expectations of instant communication, of instant gratification, of getting what you need right away from an Uber or something like that. But I also really like that you're speaking about the asynchronous. And Manjeet, I'll come back to you, but I want to pick on Lawrence for a second, because you've pioneered an asynchronous approach to conversational therapy that is asynchronous. So we're all very, I think, fixated on the real time, the synchronous, and being in the same place and time with video, or even texting in the moment. But what Jason's brought up reminds me of the approach that you've really worked on, which is incorporating a technique that can help within asynchronous communication, within email communication, or just over time.
Yeah, that's where we started. I've been doing online counseling for 27 years. I started doing online counseling in 1994. So all we had then was email. And yeah, using some techniques to compensate for the absence of tone of voice and nonverbals, that's been really critical. I will say that the most surprising thing about the text-based work, we call it therapy mail, haha. Is that it works. And not only that, but clients feel connected and engaged with us. We went into it assuming that it was going to be the poorer cousin, and we started doing research, assuming that things would take longer and people would feel less connected, and it turned out not to be true. that clients actually feel deeply connected and engaged in the text-based work. We do, research measuring. I don't know if people are familiar with this idea, but the therapeutic alliance, the connection between the client and the provider. Do they feel safe? Do they feel taken care of? Do they feel looked after? And the numbers in the text-based work are just as high as the in-person. So that, I think the bottom line is that we are social beings, and we want to be connected. And even people who say they don't feel that struggle inside themselves and there's something wrong with them. We want to be connected. And so people do, they feel connection and engagement. There are lots of, so yeah, it doesn't have to be live, real time, avatars in video or whatever, or, Star Trek. People feel connected and looked after, as long as we go into it with that attitude and that approach, desiring to provide that connection and engagement. It works.
Absolutely. And at the risk of blatant self-promotion, Lawrence and I have spent some time in my podcast talking about some of this. So I'll send those links, Rodell, to you. But one of the things that I remember you saying that was really vivid for me is that you're serving clients at 3 o'clock in the morning when you're asleep. Because those email exchanges and the emotions that the technique that you're using, clients have told you that they'll wake up in a sweat of anxiety, and they'll open their email and they'll reread the session. That the interactions that you've had, and that's something that is exceptionally valuable. That's technology mediated. That again, you think about someone who leaves a session and retains 15% of what the conversation was with a therapist because they're still so stressed out. Whereas in this case, every single piece of that is there for them to review, to get the advice again, to get the insight, to feel cared for and understood. And I found that's something that is incredibly powerful and something that is the simplest of technologies that we sort of take for granted.
Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like, that's exactly what I say. I'm in bed asleep at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm asleep. My client is up wandering around in their apartment in a panic, and they could either be saying to themselves, come on, man, settle down. You got an appointment on Friday with Lawrence. Or they could open the laptop, go to the website, open up the conversation we've been having, and review for themselves those 5 affirmations I gave them, the 3 things they identified for themselves that are the ways that they overcome anxiety, that website that they still haven't looked at that I suggested they go to. I spend 50 minutes, a clinical hour, replying to them. They can spend 1, 2, 5, 10, 15 hours with me, as much time as they want. And because we use these specific techniques to enhance the presence, the sense of presence and engagement, the clients say to us, it was like you were in the room with me. Like, their lived experiences of being connected and engaged. I'm in bed asleep. I have nothing to do with it at that point. But their lived experience as a social being, as we are, is that they're connected. And the other thing I'll say, just this one last thing, is they're working on their stuff. They're actually working to try to make their life better. That impacts their self-reflection and their self-awareness and their self-concept. What kind of a person are you, Bob? I am the kind of person who, when I wake up in a panic at 3 in the morning, I strive to make my life better. That's a very powerful self-reflection and awareness to have.
No, that's great. And I think that speaks in some ways to what Jason and Manjeet have been speaking about previously about this. There's processes, there's below the iceberg of the technology and how we interact with each other. So Manjeet, I want to come back to you and ask, where are you looking for inspiration in other places as you're developing your work and strategies at ACCESS? And is that factor into how you might take an idea and try to run with it or implement it or replicate it in your work?
So just to take a step back from that, I just wanted to mention that a lot of the work that we've done in developing our systems, and going back to, I think I spoke about 2016, 2017, when we started on what we called our end-to-end digital services sort of development process. We worked closely with one of our corporate sponsors, Accenture. So they're a big corporation and they specialize in technology. So I think we've gotten a lot of inspiration, support from them, and guidance, of course. And so a couple of the things that I wanted to speak to related to your point around best practices. One is something that I alluded to earlier, which is really like, what's your foundational technology? And a lot of it has to do with your database and your tracking, because everything, technology is like building blocks. And so you need to start with where all your client data is, and then go from there. Because if you're going to build an e-learning platform, or if you're going to have, you know, webinars or anything else, you want to be able to very easily send that information out to your clients without, as we talked about earlier, even with text messaging, you can't, like, you know, email each client one at a time. You need to be able to use your database as that foundational piece. And so that was a really important learning, is start with that foundation, and pick a product or a package that you can grow with. And that's really important, because sometimes you'll pick a tool that maybe is, you know, just good enough for now, but then you'll be stumped in the future when you try to start adding pieces on there. So although it's impossible to build a whole system overnight, it's really important that you start with those foundational pieces, and then you start adding on things, because it's amazing, like all the different apps and plug and play and development tools that they can be integrated or not. So it's really important that you have that good foundation. And again, that's coming from, you know, from our expertise, you know, from Accenture and so on. So that was a really important part of our development. The other piece that was really important, and I think it's a best practice, works across sectors, is really looking at the client journey and mapping that out. And I think that's really important. I think, you know, when we're doing in person and over so many years, things kind of happen in a very almost unconscious, like you're not even aware of, like, how are clients hearing, how are they walking in, who are they talking to first, you know, what's the role of the receptionist versus the counselor, and all, you know, all these things that happen fairly organically. And when you have to start to translate that into online services, you have to start mapping out that process, because otherwise you miss a part. And then you'll notice that when you start doing things online, it's like, oh, we don't have this information, or how do we get these clients into the webinars or whatever. So it's really, I think that mapping the client journey is a best practice, I think, across sectors. I know that they're doing that in retail, in any sort of industry. So it, you know, you can do it in a very formal way, or you can do it in a very informal way, just with your teams, but to really map that out right from the point of where clients are just learning about your service. So that's that outreach piece, to how are they coming into your service, intake, registration, then the actual service, but then the continuum from there, the follow-up and ongoing support. So those are some best practices. I think early on, when we were creating our e-learning sort of library of materials, you know, we kind of naturally looked at education, you know, because we know education, there's online courses and things that people can do. So we kind of look to that, but we also are really aware that it's quite different, that people in our services are not just learning like students. It has to be way more interactive. So if you were taking like a university course, you might have a module that's like, you know, an hour or two, and you'll sit there and you'll go through it all. But I think, you know, when you need counseling and support, you need that kind of a hybrid, again, of approach. You may spend an hour, but probably only, as Lauren said, you'll only spend that time if you've already spoken to somebody first or after, right? So there has to be a mix of things, because otherwise people won't just simply sit through, you know, modules and videos. It has to be interactive. It has to be a combination of different channels.
Excellent. Thank you, Manjeet. Unfortunately, we're coming close to the very end of our time, but I want to summarize parts that I've heard that I think are really important. These are the below the iceberg things that so above the iceberg is the client data tool, but below the iceberg are the processes and the desire and the commitment to understanding your client, which I think, Jason, you've also spoken to quite a bit, that, you know, what are not just their technology, but their needs, their preferences, their interests. Who are these people and what do they need from you? And the data can help collect that and tease it out and collect trends and things like that. but also the notion of taking the time to do that. And as Lawrence has talked about, taking the time to recognize that the way you're doing service online will take more time in order for it to be effective. And then having the space and time for reflection, to learn from what you're doing. So Jason, you've spoken a lot about the evaluation pieces that you have, the stand up with staff, the weekly meetings with students, for example, to continue constantly learning, and then evaluating and learning. Even I love the tiny gains approach. So even micro learning, right? Little iterative steps towards building something based on what you're learning from what you're already doing. Before I let you go, any final tweets of a thought that you want to leave the audience with in terms of this conversation about measuring their practices? Yeah, Lawrence.
So the one thing I'll say, and this actually comes more from my work as an instructor at Wilfrid Laurier University with undergrads than the clinical training, it is this: people think they're on the internet. They're not on the internet. Right now, we're not on the internet. This is a training. We're all in a virtual space and we're doing a training. This is not YouTube. This is not Facebook. This is not Instagram. My experience and many of the challenges I had with students, and they were awful, was, and my son came up with this actually, was, you know what, Dad? They think they're on Instagram. Yes, that's what it is. They think they're on Instagram. So I think this is a really key thing to be conscious of. And when something weird happens and you think that was really mean or nasty, that's the internet. People are mean and nasty on the internet. They try to destroy each other and crush each other. They don't try to find solutions. So when that happens, just take a moment to think, does this person think we're on the internet? Because we're not. We're in a counseling office. We're in a university classroom. I think that's a key insight that my son, the 19-year-old, had.
The youth shall lead us. Manjeet, any final thoughts?
Final thoughts, I think in developing technology, just like a lot of other things that we do in our businesses, it's not going to be perfect. So just going back to another best practice, and that's to be able to develop and utilize your technology in what they call sprints. So it's really putting it out there, testing it, trying it out, and then come up with your second iteration. But if you wait to have it perfect, it will just take way too much time and you won't know it's perfect, because really getting that feedback and being able to measure, as we've talked about, is really important. So get it out there, measure the effectiveness, get the feedback, and then keep on improving. So continuous improvement is really important.
Great point. Jason, no pressure, but the final thought and kernel of inspiration comes from you.
In my reflection and working with youth in low-income communities, what comes to mind is just a reflection that education is not a place, and I think that applies for kind of many different things. Is that the conceptualization of what we're doing right now all online. It's that it's not that we're trying to replicate a school or a tutoring place online. It's that focusing on the process. So education is fundamentally about the relationship, and focusing on that I think will serve everyone well.
That's a great note to end on. That underlies everything in the work that we're doing. And if you take that into account, you'll make the right choices around technology because you're listening to your clients, for example. So I want to say thank you so much to Jason, Manjeet, and Lawrence. I've learned a lot, and I found this has been valuable. I'm hoping that everyone else has, and we're going to continue the conversation for folks who are from the sector. If you're welcome to stick around, but if not, thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
And we appreciate you being here and sharing your experiences and knowledge with everybody.
Yeah, my pleasure. You're welcome. And Jason's right. It is always about relationship. Brilliant comment, succinct. That's it. Always, everything.
Awesome. See, you did it, Jason. I knew you could.
Yeah, you got over that bar, dude. That was awesome. Yeah.
Thank you all so much. This has been so valuable. I appreciate it. And I will, again, not to blatantly self-promote, but Jason was my first interview on my podcast and shared, this is from years ago, his approach that I would suggest hasn't really changed because it's fundamentally based in what he just described. But there's a lot that we can learn from these early adopters. And so there'll be more depth from what they've presented to you today. today in some of what you can read and listen to in the future as well. So Rodell, I'll deluge you with the insights from all of these amazing folks, and you can continue passing that out to the community.
Thanks, folks. My pleasure. Take care, everybody. Be well.
Take care, Lawrence.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, Jason. Take care.
Bye.